sponsors so we think Chicago title. We have Adam Bugos from the Real Estate Group, Tim Curie from Be Safe, and Mark Teague from Teague Home Inspections. That's all.
That's it. That's all. That's all. We're jumping right in.
Yeah, good enough.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll introduce ourselves. I've been a realtor for 7.5 years now. Work on me and Jamie have the Winchester sales team. Deal a lot with buyers, so I mean here lately we don't do a whole lot of repair addendums, but I've gotten fairly good at doing repair addendums over the years. So I've done some training at the real estate group, and that's why I was asked to do this, because it's a very similar training. Everything that I'm going to go over is just my way of doing things. Obviously, it's not the only way. It's not necessarily the best way. It's just a different way for you to look at it and maybe consider things. Go ahead.
I'm Tim Carney. I started Be Safe Home Inspections, I think it was about 1994. I think there was only 3 of us then, me, Mark, and Merlin, wasn't there about?
Yeah.
About when you started? And maybe Dana. And I'm a retired city fireman, Springfield fireman, and I did this just to try to help people out on their home purchases and things. And to get ready for this morning, I printed off several things and actually read them, just so I'm ready. And I think if you guys read all these things, it's just such a wealth of information. Most of us follow the standard of practice by ASHI and all their guidelines. And I read the capillary of repair addendum, which I don't really want to know, but I read it just so I know for the meeting today, because that's you guys' job. And the Illinois General Assembly Home Inspection Act, which dictates what we do, how we do it, and why we do it, and all the rules about it. And then my inspection agreement that says what we do and what we're liable and what we're not. And that's about the best I can do to prepare. And if anyone has any questions, they can always refer to these after that. They're all online.
I'm Mark Teague, Teague Inspections. I've been, like Tim, been doing this for, I started about 1995 or so. I was with Grassroots Builders back then. I got pulled aside one time from Frank to ask if I wanted to do inspections. I'm like, oh, okay, I'd give it a shot. Voila, here I am, over 7 years later, going on 20 years I think next year. So 2016, branched off from BFHT Inspections to open my own business of inspections. So here I am, and part of this fine town.
Okay, well, I'll jump right into it. I think, as we all know, the home inspection process is probably the biggest hurdle that most of us have to get across. And then you get into the repair addendums as well. So, setting the expectations of the home inspection process. This is for buyers and sellers part. This process is far and above the most contentious hurdle to get over in a transaction. Be clear about your level of expertise, but be an expert in your lane. So what that means is we've been in enough homes that we know if there's an major issue. We can see that. And it's okay if we say, hey, I think that may be a problem. If, on the other hand, a buyer says, hey, that foundation crack looks bad, and you say, oh, no, that's no big deal, that's not necessarily okay. If you want to point things out and say, hey, we may need to have somebody look at this, that's one thing. All right, but you obviously have to stay in your lane. The inspection addendums, the contract all have language in there that says that we are not licensed home inspectors, and we're not, but we are professionals that know what we're looking at. We see enough houses. So just think of that when you're with a buyer. Explain the truth of agents who don't properly explain inspection addendums and the importance of asking for repairs within the scope of the language. So we're going to get into this really heavily, but it's really important that we stay in our lane with that part of it as well. All right, when it comes time for asking for repairs, we need to know what we can and can't ask for. So for buyers strictly, start the inspection discussion early and often. So one of my best practices is from day one that we start, when I meet a new buyer, we start discussing what the home inspection process looks like. And if we've got an Uncle Joe or a dad or a grandpa or somebody who wants to come along in the process and they want to have a say in that home inspection, they need to come to the showings as well. They need to see what else is out there. But the more you train buyers on the need of a home inspection, what's going to be in a home inspection, the last thing you want is a buyer to walk in a 100-year-old house and think that there's going to be a 2-page inspection report. Obviously doesn't exist. So describe what as is really means. A lot of times buyers think if it's as is, the sellers are hiding something. And that's, I don't want to say never the case, but it's almost never the case. Sellers have to disclose, which we talk about in a minute anyway. So a lot of times it's just that sellers don't want to go through that extra step of negotiation, which is fine. But a buyer doesn't necessarily need to be scared of that. They just need to understand, you know, what they're getting into. Explain to the buyer the importance of inspections as an insurance policy that they may need to cash in on. So home inspections are, you know, under $1,000 always, almost always. And it's an insurance policy for the buyer. They're going to get this home inspection, they're going to get the report back, and then they're going to decide, you know, if it's option 1, they're going to decide if they want the house or not. If it's option 2, they're going to come up with the suggested repairs that they want fixed, and then it becomes a negotiation to see if it's, you know, if we're going to get it to the finish line. But the goal of it is they're opening up that can of worms so that they know what they're purchasing. Most of the time, it's the largest financial decision of somebody's life. So that small dollar amount that they can put into that to know and be assured that that their investment is somewhat secure is obviously better. This market, obviously, now it's calming down a little bit, but when we weren't doing as many home inspections because you couldn't do them and still get an offer pushed through, it's a risky time for a lot of buyers. And there were a lot of houses that were sold that probably needed home inspections that didn't get them. So those people could have a really bad conversation with you in 5 years when they go to sell it and they have their first home inspection. And, you know, now there's a list of items that they should have had fixed when they purchased. On to the sellers. So sellers are the same thing. When you meet with a seller, you need to discuss what the home inspection process looks like, because it's very likely that they're going to have a home inspection. Explain to them the need to disclose. You know, when we sat down and wrote the inspection addendums, when we sat down and wrote the contract, we put it in there specifically that if an item is disclosed up front, a buyer can't ask for it in a home inspection. So if you know there's a crack in the foundation, if you know there's a plumbing leak, whatever it is, I mean, it's got to be disclosed. And if you disclose it and the buyer writes their offer, tenders their offer with that knowledge, then it is what it is. You know, they knew they had the opportunity, they accepted it as it was. Explain the buyer's viewpoint of the inspections. A lot of times sellers take offense to an inspection. You know, my house is perfect, why would you want to inspect my house? That's not the case. It's the buyer's viewpoint. It is, you have to put yourself as a seller in a buyer's viewpoint and say, look, they're spending the most money they've ever spent in their life. They want to have a home inspection. They want to know that their house is stable and secure and that there's no cracked trusses in the attic, there's no mold growing, there's no stuff that we didn't know about ahead of time. Writing the offer is the best time to get serious about inspections. So, I'm going to actually exit out of this for a second. I'm going to show you what one of my, here's what I guess let me back up a little bit. One of the big problems that I have with, especially with first-time home buyers, but just any buyer in general, who is one of the buyers who's a little more analytical, is when we authentic them the contract. You don't get to have this conversation. So it's best to have the conversation early, kind of back what I was saying a minute ago. But if you can sit down face-to-face with these buyers, it is so much better for you and for the seller. If I'm and this is something you might not have thought about, but if I'm a seller and I get a repair and I get an inspection addendum that looks like this, I'm going to feel a lot more at ease, because I know that agent explained what an inspection addendum looks like. When you mark these things up like this, and you go through number 1 and you say, the purposes of this addendum, we're looking for a material defect. And you say, look, I'm going to get, you know, you joke around the whole time, you laugh when you're in houses, all that, but then it comes inspection time and it's time to get serious. And then, you know, the face changes. And if you don't listen to anything I'm saying all day, listen to this, because this is going to happen. You know, you will have air let out of your balloon when you get this report back. The report will be much longer than you think. The report is going to have a lot of photos, and it's going to be scary, and it's going to freak you out. And you've got to take a breath and just know that these are the items we're looking for. We're looking for material defects. So if we're looking for something and you want to ask for it, If you don't listen to anything else I say right now, listen to this. We're gonna have a 3-point threshold that one of the items has to meet in order to ask for it on a repair addendum. And that's in number 1. Does the material defect significantly impair the health and safety of the future occupants? Is it an item that's not in functioning working order, or does it significantly impact the value? One of those 3, it has to meet one of those 3 to be on a repair addendum. If it does not, we'll get into that in a minute. But when you explain that to a buyer up front, it makes you less of a salesman later. If you don't explain it now and then you sit down with an inspection report later and you're like, no, it's fine. Now you're selling them the house as opposed to educating them up front. So if every agent did this, it would make all of our lives so much easier. The inspection addendum is obviously a huge hurdle, and an educated buyer and seller is the absolute key. I generally go down to number 3, and I rattle off a bunch of the items that we can't ask for. We cannot ask for items that are maintenance items. We can't ask for things that are code related that were not installed. I mean, this part gets a little hard to describe. We can't ask for items that are code related now, as long as they were code related when they were put in. So if there's no GFCI outlets in a 1900 house, there was no code in 1900 saying it had to have a GFI outlet. Financing may require it, but that's a code related item. Okay? So same with grounded outlets. You know, you see it a lot, ungrounded outlets, it is what it is. As long as the house wasn't built after 1970, it's a code-related item. You can't bring every house up to today's code. But the other things you can't be asking for: cracked, curling shingles, missing and torn screens, fogged windows, tears, worn spots, floor coverings, cosmetic, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, but I tell the buyer that, so that when the time comes and they say, the house doesn't have any screens in it. Well, if screens were important, we should have been looking at that when we went through the house, because that's something you can tell when we're walking through. But that conversation needs to happen early. Mechanical system, furnace, heating, air conditioning, plumbing, electrical, roof structure, structural components. All of that stuff is major, major, major items. They need to be okay. And if they're not okay, then we need to either ask for it to be fixed or we need to go. So, B was recently changed, and I think it kind of went under the radar for a lot of people. The roof has to be in functioning working order, meaning no leaks. That's the threshold. What we didn't have on there before was free of any permanent roof coverings and is structurally sound. That language wasn't in there prior to this. So if you had a roof that wasn't leaking, but half of the shingles were ripped off, that wasn't a defect. Now it is, because the house needs to have shingles or whatever roof covering that's supposed to be on there. Number 6, also just another one that people need to understand, this wasn't always here. Sellers shall ensure that all utilities are functioning at the time of the inspection and re-inspections. If a buyer and seller sign this document and there's no inspections on at the time, yes, you can handwrite it in on page 5. This also should tell the seller that they need to have the utilities turned on for the inspections. Doesn't do you a whole lot of good to do inspections without water and electric on. And that's pretty much all that I do on these. I kind of do go over, for an option 2, kind of what the volley looks like going back and forth, so an agent knows, or a buyer knows. Okay, so that's the expectations. What's okay and what isn't, getting serious. Tell the buyer how an inspection is going to make them feel. Again, their shoulders are going to drop. Their air is going to let out of their balloon, no question. I've never seen a buyer look at a home inspection and be like, oh my gosh, I love that there's 10 items on there. Like, it's not going to happen. But if they know that it's coming in advance, it makes it a lot easier. It's always good to tell buyers what sellers have to fix if they want to move forward with the contract. There are contractual items that a seller would have to fix if they want to move forward, or it's a negotiation more or less. But it's always good to describe that stuff. Okay, inspections are in. So inspection comes in, buyer calls, says, hey, can we sit down and talk about this report? Granted, this is 2-3 weeks after you sign the original contract with them. The excitement of signing that offer is now over. All right, now it becomes time for you to be, you know, honest, upfront, forward, but remembering that your goal is to get this house to closing. That's the goal of all parties. So what I say, not necessarily the right thing, is remember when we wrote the offer I told you about today. The report will let some air out of your balloon, and that's expected and it's okay. This is a whatever-year-old house, 60-year-old house. There's going to be dents and dings. Let's go over some of the major stuff. Remember our thresholds. And then I say that, remember our thresholds. It's got to be a health and safety issue. It's got to impact the value. Or it's got to be a major mechanical item not functioning as intended. Those are the three. Every single time, if you don't do that, well, you know, that window doesn't open right, or that, you know, that doorknob's wiggly, or that door rubs when it closed, whatever it is. Is it one of those three items? And usually they're like, yeah, you're right. That becomes a honeydew Saturday list is what that becomes. So now it's time to talk about what we're going to ask for. Mold in the crawl, yeah, we need to get that looked at, definitely. That's a health and safety issue. Leaking boot on the roof, absolutely. That's a major item that's not functioning as intended, it's leaking. The intention for a roof is that it sheds water away from the property. It's not doing that. Let's ask for it to be fixed. GFCI in the kitchen, again, that's tricky. How old's the house? Is it a 5-year-old house? Yeah, it needs GFI in the kitchen. They should have never done that in the first place. If it's an older house and it's a code-related issue, maybe. If it's an FHA, you're probably going to go ahead and do it anyway because FHA is going to require it. There's some missing screens. Again, those are important to some people, but they don't affect the health and safety or impact the value. Repair addendum time. When it gets real hairy. Some do's and don'ts. All right, I'm gonna go through a few of the do's and don'ts first. We all see it. An agent puts on a repair addendum that says, I want a licensed roofer to fix the roof. I want a licensed plumber to fix the plumbing. I want a licensed contractor to fix the mold. That is completely contradictory to what the repair addendum says, 100%. The repair addendum is very clear, and we wrote it this specific way. Lines 6 and 7. Within 7 days following the date of the inspection, at least 7 calendar days prior to closing, the buyer requests that the seller make in a reasonable and workmanlike manner, if competent to do so, or cause to be made by a qualified contractor the following repairs to correct material defects discovered in the buyer's report. So this is a legitimate repair addendum that I received. Licensed roofer to replace soft rotted sheathing. Pretty cool. Is it going to be a licensed roofer? More than likely. But if the seller owns a roofing company, or if he's roofed half of his life but he's not licensed, the seller can absolutely fix that. There is no mandate that a seller use a licensed person for most items, okay? Minus radon. You know, radon's one of the ones that's actually very, very, very specific. Licensed plumber and electrician to install a sump pump, outlets, drainage tile, sump pit to today's code. This particular house had a sump pit that was dug, it was cut in, no water in it, and it's never had a sump pump in it. So buyer says, I want a licensed person to put in a sump pump and an outlet and all this. No, that's not, show me a defect. There's no defect there. There's not water. There's just something there that isn't necessary. Licensed plumbing to repair bathroom plumbing leak. Master tub drain. Literally a homeowner, most of the time, can get underneath there and crank the nut a little bit tighter and it'll fix it. You don't need a licensed plumber for that. Seller to stretch vapor barrier and install a new barrier where needed. So now they're telling the seller that they need to do something. That's not what a repair addendum says. That's not what it's for. That's not the intent of it. Okay, licensed HVAC contractor to install plate cover for an exterior shutoff for safety, which is on the panel outside for the little breaker box for an air conditioner. They wanted a HVAC contractor to put in a cover plate for electrical, whatever. So this is the kind of stuff that we see all the time. I mean, every one of us has had these exact same issues, I have no doubt. Again, you can leave the word licensed off of there because there's no chance that the seller has to do that. So I just say, you know, seller to fix plumbing leak, or seller to have plumbing leak fixed, seller to have roof fixed, seller to have whatever. If the seller wants to do it, great. If they're competent to do so, they have every right to do it. And the catch-all for that is, these guys can come back at 7 days prior to closing and make sure that it's been done properly. And if it hasn't, now we got a big red flag we're throwing up. But it doesn't mean it needs to be a licensed person. You cannot ask for money on the first volley, okay? A lot of times buyers will say, let's just ask them for $3,000. That's not okay. Sometimes agents negotiate it ahead of time, yeah, whatever, that's fine. But the first volley across from a buyer has to be a buyer asking for repairs. If they're an option 2 buyer, which means they're asking for repairs, that's all they can ask for. They can't ask for money. We took that off. That used to be an option. But buyers would hold a seller hostage due to that. A buyer would say, hey, I want $700. Well, then a seller says, it ain't $700, fix that. Well, now do they get out of the contract? Now can the buyer walk because the seller's refusing to fix it? Now, if they're asking for money, can the buyer walk? Of course, they can always try to walk. But what matters is, are they getting their earnest money back? Is there going to be a lawsuit due to it? So it's important that we don't ask for money up front. If you put a laundry list of items that are all material defects, and a seller says, you know what, we'll give you $5,000, just go away. Okay, now let's put it on there. There's actually a spot for that in the second volley back. But again, it's not in the first. You know, if there's non-defect items on there, a buyer doesn't have the ability to terminate a contract due to non-material defect items. It can have 500 minor items that add up to thousands of dollars in repairs, but if they're not material defects, it doesn't rise to the point of being able to terminate the contract because of it. And that's something that's hard for a buyer to hear sometimes. Some people will say, oh, I want invoices and proof. Again, that's not contractual. Anywhere is that contractual. I want a roofer's invoice saying it's been paid. It doesn't exist. The seller has the right to fix it. Most of the time, sellers will provide those invoices just as a, hey, if you have an issue, so-and-so roofing fixed it, you know, they can come back out and fix it if they, you know, if you have a problem. But it can't be required, and you can't put it on the addendum. A lot of people will say, you know, I want licensed roofer to fix this, attach invoice. No, it's not, you don't have that ability to ask for that. Common items that get a little weird, okay, mold. We see it all, well, organic material. It's never mold, it's an organic material. It's mildew. Does that have to be a licensed person that fixes it? The EPA says if it's less than 10 square feet, that a homeowner can fix it. That's EPA standards. Because it's not, at that point, it's not major. There are fungus and mold bombs that you can throw down in the basement that kill everything, guaranteed to work. Homeowners are allowed to do that. Everybody assumes that, oh, you have to have a licensed mold mitigator to come in and fix it. Is it a good idea? I would say it is, but it's not a requirement. And sometimes it's extremely expensive. So if it's a small area and there's a reason for it, you know, underneath the bathtub, there's a leak and there's some mold growing, that can be fixed by the homeowner. That doesn't have to be a licensed person coming in and fix that. Other stuff we see on every report, not every report, 90% of the reports, double tap breakers. Double tap breakers, all the time. So here's the truth behind double tap breakers. There are some breakers that allow it. The problem is, you have to pull the breaker out generally to know it. Some of them on Square D will have a little icon on it that show 2 wires going underneath the screw. As long as they're on opposite sides of the screw, it's not a defect. Okay, if it's an older, eaten breaker from 1980 that doesn't allow double taps. You're not gonna, no, you need to get that fixed. But there are times where they get flagged no matter what, but they're not always a defect. So, and again, if the seller understands and knows what to do and how to fix it, they have every right to fix it themselves. But that brings up another point. Do you want the seller messing with the electrical box? The house isn't burning down now. It's been here for 60 years. Do you just want to say, hey, you know, your uncle's an electrician, let him fix it later? Or do you want to put it down in a repair addendum where somebody is now breaking one of the screws loose, pulling a wire out, and then cranking it back down, hopefully to standard? Personally, I would rather have a new buyer fix that later, if it's not an issue. That's just, but if they're worried about it, if it's a concern, absolutely. You know, if it's not meant for that, every electrician will tell you double tap breakers aren't a good idea, but they are okay in some cases, some instances. Double tap neutrals. Again, I went to college in 2000 to be an electrician, and we wired them with double tap neutrals. That was okay. The NEC code, National Electrical Code, didn't come out until 2002 and say that double tap breakers weren't okay. It just didn't say anything about it before. So it was always just, as long as you crank the screw down to the proper torque, then it was okay. Well, now standard is much different. Now you can't have double tap neutrals. So if the house was built prior to 2002 and it has double tap neutrals, technically a code related item. Is it easy to fix? Absolutely. It's not a huge deal. But again, I don't know that I want a seller cranking around inside of an electrical box. Just my thought. I mean, because they don't have to have an electrician fix it. And the other thing is if the seller did a pre-inspection, there's a possibility that it had that before, but they've already fixed it themselves. So you would never know it. They could have fixed it a month ago before a pre-inspection and you would never know it. That's why a seller has the ability to fix what they want on their house, because they could have done it a month ago, and as long as it's to standard, it's okay. So I skipped one purposely on the left because, again, we all hear it. I guarantee you every realtor in here has heard this. The buyer's agent asks for a bunch of ridiculous stuff, and you say, you can't ask for that, and they say, I'm just doing what my client says. That's not okay, all right? And here is the Illinois license law that says that's not okay. All right? Duties of licensees representing clients. A licensee representing clients shall exercise reasonable skill and care in performance of brokerage services. Applying this means to acknowledge with the client that they could potentially be violating an already agreed to term of the agreement, the buyer inspection addendum, when they ask for non-material defects to be corrected. You can't willingly breach a contract for your client. It's wrong. You asking for that is going against the set of rules that you agreed to, or I'm sorry, the buyer agreed to when they signed the offer. The buyer and seller agreed to rules of engagement in the buyer inspection addendum. So, you can't come back in, you shouldn't come back in without violating license law and say, yeah, we'll ask for it, maybe they'll fix it. No, that's not okay. You have to ask for what are material defects. That's why the first line of the inspection addendum, or I'm sorry, the repair addendum says, buyer asks for the following material defects to be remedied. If it's not a material defect, you're adding something that doesn't fit. And it puts you at risk, it puts your buyer at risk. That is a potential lawsuit. We don't want to mess with that. By willingly making a repair addendum that is against the terms of the agreement, it could put the client in legal liability. Therefore, the licensee's actions to facilitate the request is not exercising reasonable skill and care of their client's best interest. So again, be very careful with that statement. All it takes is education up front. If you educate a buyer before they ever sit down with you to ask for a repair addendum, you don't have that issue. When you send an offer off Authentisign and you never have the conversation with the buyer on what they can and can't ask for, that's when we have these issues. So it's extremely important that we sit down, we have the conversation, and we educate the buyers so that they know what they can and can't ask for, and we get across that hurdle and, get it to closing like we all wanted. The last little side note that I want to add is, since we've been doing a lot of pre-inspections, there are times where a buyer will request repairs to be made at the time of the offer on a repair addendum, which is absolutely accurate. That's how you should do it. The problem is when you attach that repair addendum to the purchase contract and send it off to the lender. That's where it becomes a problem. Because a lender is going to have different standards than what our license law and what our contract states. So our contract states buyers or sellers can fix items. An underwriter may have a completely different set of rules. And that can cause a lot of issues, especially if a seller has already fixed it. Then, sometimes a lender will allow the home inspector to come back and say that, yeah, it's okay. Other times they want to see actual receipts. And that causes a big rub. So not saying we want to hide everything from the banks, don't make it sound fraudulent, but they don't see repair addendums generally. So as long as it's fixed and as long as it's to standard and the bank's asset is safe, it's okay, then, it's okay.
So you're suggesting we do not include the repair addendum with the contract?
No, not when you send it to the lender.
So
Yeah.
you're suggesting we retract a part of the signed contract?
No.
Okay.
No, those are separate attachments. So when you send a contract to a lender, at that point, you don't need a buyer's designated agent form with it either. There are forms that don't need to go to the lender, and the repair addendum is one of them.
Unless the box is marked on the contract.
Right, there's a box on the contract that says that it's included.
Then it has to be included.
Exactly.
There's not a box for repair.
Not for repair addendum.
There's not a repair addendum
There's
one.
not a repair
No.
addendum box.
That's
No,
gone off the new.
Yeah, that's not there.
there's never.
That doesn't
been.
Repair addendum.
It says that
Yeah.
only be one.
Yeah, repair addendums come after the
That's the
contract.
contract, right.
Yeah. So the repair addendum can technically happen 10 minutes after the contract has been signed.
Right.
If you write C attached repair addendum.
That's the problem.
That's a problem.
Then-
That's a problem.
then
But there is
part
no
of the
checkbox
contract
for a repair
purchase.
addendum for that exact reason.
Well, I love what you're saying here, and I mean, that's definitely knowledge I didn't have, but so many times agents say, I'm just doing what my buyer said, I'm working for my buyer.
Right.
What's the consequence for being not?
They could go to court for their buyer.
They could.
They could end up in court because you took on that liability as well as an agent. When you wrote that repair addendum, asking those things because your buyer wanted it,
Right, but we all want to get to the finish line, and I mean, I'm like, okay, I appreciate you working for your buyer, we all do it, but let's be realistic, and then, it just becomes this battle, but
Yep.
there's no real consequence other than court,
No.
which I get, court is an option, but.
Personally, what I do with one of those repair addendums generally is I will take, and this isn't a jerk move necessarily. I've done it several times, and I hope nobody in this room has gotten one of them, maybe they have. I will take the repair addendum, I will highlight the items that are non-material defects, and then I will take the inspection addendum that everybody signed, and I will circle the area that says that they won't ask for those things. I'll circle the initials of the buyer, and I'll put that on top of the repair addendum when I send the report back to the buyer. So when the seller says, look, we're not fixing these items, and you're not getting out of the contract for it, because they're not material defects, and we agreed to that here. Here's your initials, here's your signatures. So it's a really powerful way to send that back, if that exact
Right,
scenario
no, I
happens.
like what you're saying, I just want some sort of consequence without
Yeah,
being too much of a,
right.
without.
I'm not even gonna
I get
flash
it.
this because there's.
I get it.
Another thing I've run into, because of the shorter closings, and we're doing these 3-week closings, everything's moving super fast, the home inspection was done, and then we ran into the timelines of they were kind of holding out on me a little bit, giving me the repair addendum, and get this laundry list, which we negotiated, everything was fine, and then they came back at me, we want those 7 days prior to closing to check these items. Well, I didn't get it till 2 days prior to the 7
Right.
days. So
Yep.
who trumps
That's
who
tough.
on that?
I mean, that's just the,
I mean, we signed it, so,
ultimately, if the contract has to be extended, it has to be extended.
oh yeah, well, that was.
I mean, that's if the buyer really wants a full 7 days from repairs, I mean, that's the remedy. So under any scenario, if, say, there needs to be whatever repaired, and say it is a roof, you know, the roof needs repair, and it snows, and there's snow on the roof for 2 weeks. And the time comes that we're not gonna get it done 7 days before closing. The remedy is always that the buyer has the ability to extend the contract to give them the 7-day inspection
But
time.
if the buyer wants out, that is a way for them to.
That would be a very tricky spot, in my opinion. Old Nettle might have a better opinion on it, but.
It is.
I have the, on the attachment area, if there's been a pre-inspection and it says we're gonna fix this stuff, the buyer needs to attach a repair addendum that says the seller is to fix these things prior to closing. And the contract actually says that. So there's not a box to check, but there's wording that says the attached repair addendum. So in that case, you do have to attach to the contract, and it is gonna go to the lender.
Not necessarily, and we wrote that language with a lender in mind for that exact reason.
So if it says it's attached, how is it not
It
attached?
says to.
Attached if applicable.
Right.
That's the key.
So
If
then,
applicable.
but it's applicable because we're requesting those repairs be made.
If you would like to send it off that way, you have every right to.
Okay.
Yep,
Well,
feel free.
sometimes,
Yep.
well,
So then you're not technically agreeing to it. Right.
yeah, so unless, otherwise they're on the attached repair and then the applicable.
Mhm.
So in that case. I mean,
If applicable. So, I mean, it can be applicable
If
10 minutes
you've
after the
asked for
contract.
So you send it separately from your offer?
100%.
Interesting.
Yep.
Good to
Always.
know.
To me, it's just part of the contract.
No, well,
It would
he's
be,
not.
but
See,
the-
he's writing it as two separate documents.
Just like it.
Signing them separately and then sending them at the same
So
time.
the mindset that you can have with it, and that we talked about in Forms Committee, was that a repair addendum is gonna come after the offer. But in this scenario, that time frame smashes up to very close to the time of the contract signing, as opposed to 2 weeks later.
Right.
So that's the only difference, is we're now pushing it all the way up to where we're putting a repair addendum in at the same time. And the reason for that, the reason why that's important is when you do that, you attach the buyer inspection addendum as well. And that's what gives your buyer the ability to re-inspect at the end to make sure that it's done properly.
Right.
So if you do we are signing this contract with the ability to use the seller's home inspection, you need to be able to have the buyer come back in and inspect that 7 days before closing if your buyer wants. And that's why you have to have a buyer inspection addendum attached to it. So you still generally, in that scenario, would attach a buyer inspection addendum, and then you would send a repair addendum, shortly thereafter.
Yeah, I ran into that where they said on the contract, repair such and such item, whatever, and they tried to re-inspect, and I was like, back off,
Yeah.
that's not okay,
Right.
because show me how you have a right to do it.
You're absolutely right. The marching orders for reinspection are in the buyer inspection
Right, you
addendum.
never signed that.
Right, and if you didn't sign that, then, you're potentially putting your clients at a little bit of a risk. I mean, most of the time it's okay. A lot of times it's fixed before you ever look at the house. The house is inspected, repairs are made, they noted on there that the repairs are made. Is what it is.
All right, I just want to throw a couple things in from sitting here, just want to explain that when I said I read all these things before I got here, and I said I read the realtor stuff, and listening to everything he said just makes me more glad I don't do the realtor stuff. And my inspection agreement says right in there, we follow ASHI standards and practice and the Illinois Home Inspection Act. We don't follow the realtor stuff or any other contract, and Mark says the same thing. We do what we do, you guys do what you do. I love knowing what you guys are doing, it can help me explain things a little bit at the end, but I'm not a realtor, I couldn't go over there or say that. So I had that because that's just so important. And then the other thing, when you said you tell them we're like an insurance policy, I just asked you to not use that word. We're not an insurance policy,
Sure.
we're not a guarantee, we're not a warranty.
That's fair,
We are a trained eye, we are, give you better information to make an informed decision and help you forward with your house and with your contract. But would you agree, we don't like that word insurance policy? So, I'm just trying to.
No, I get it.
You did a great
I get
job,
it.
I love
No,
the
I get it.
presentation.
Should I say that?
And then I just wanted to throw out, I've done more inspections in the last year than I've done the last 26 years for people after they bought a house.
Same here, yeah.
Oh, really?
They bought a house, they get in there,
Post-closing?
Post-closing.
they're in there, and they say, we're starting to see stuff, and they say, they told me this roof was 4 years old, what do you think? I get up there and said, you need a new roof? First word out of their mouth is, who do we sue? I said, I don't get into that, but I think you buy a new roof.
Yeah.
And so be careful what you tell your clients. Be real careful what you tell your clients. I mean, this junk, a lot of the slumlords and everything, they go, people are going without inspections.
Yeah.
The smart ones threw their junk out there to get rid of it. And that's what, you just gotta be careful.
Mhm.
And the ethics, reading the code of ethics is a good part. Me and Mark were talking earlier, we have two things we want to bring up. Well, first of all, I'll bring up the signed inspection agreements and payments. You'll start missing your time frames because we're not releasing those reports until we got signed inspection agreement and payments. Those have to be there or we're not releasing the report. Most all good realtors know that and want that done in advance. And you've got to have
Except
that
for you
done.
do, I do, we get stuff out way before the inspection date.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
They get my electronic signature stuff, invoice, everything's well advanced to our client, either the
Yes.
seller or the buyer. If we're gonna
And they can pay in
pre-sale.
advance, sign in advance, all that way before we even get it there.
I love it when people open up their emails and do everything right. Everybody here likes that, so.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that we need to educate our buyers and sellers, whoever, but you're going to get this, this is very
Yes.
important.
Yeah, that's great.
Because so many times they're like, well, we don't have a report, I'm like, well, did you sign and pay for it? Well, I haven't done that yet. That's education on our part, I mean, we need to talk to them.
And then the last thing I had was, me and Mark were talking about material defects. That gets tricky. People always ask us, is that a material defect? Well, I'm not an attorney, but I can play one sometimes. I can argue either side on most
Yeah.
facts, most sides. But some things are obvious and some things aren't. I was with Mark, my other inspector, we were at a fundraiser just a couple weeks ago, and the realtor called like 7 or 8 times, said, we're in this house, this furnace is running. And Mark said, did you have a heating and air guy look at it? No, but it's running, it's functional, it's running. He said it was cycling on and off, too short, and it looks like a crack in the heat exchanger, but I'm not for sure. And they argued, they were closing the next day, he said, just call your heating and air guy. They called their heating and air guy, and it was a cracked heat exchanger, and it was leaking carbon monoxide. Be careful what you tell your clients. They were standing there arguing with me and Mark. They called like 7 or 8 times. I said, Mark, I'm not gonna tell you to quit answering it, but you can only say so many times, get someone else to look at it, you're pretty sure there's something wrong with it. So don't get yourself in a trick bag.
Stay in your lane, right?
Stay in your lane. And that's what we do. We do home inspections. You guys do that. And trained eye, informed decision, and yes, I tell people sometimes, I said, if I analyzed your spouse like I'm analyzing your house, you probably never would have even went out on the first date. I go, and I've never, ever had a perfect house. Never had a perfect house yet. I tell them, I said, this looks like a long list, but you're not gonna find another perfect house. You make that informed decision. And a good question to ask home inspectors, is this something you commonly find? Like the double taps, the TPR extension. Is this something you commonly find? Yes, we find that on a lot of old houses. Ask your home inspector, is this normal, or is this unusual, or is this gonna be the 3-factor threshold you guys have to follow? Which I can't quote those because I don't have to. I don't want to quote that, I stay in my lane. Even if I could, I'll pretend I
I
can't.
think you always try to, if the buyers, and we're all in the house towards the end, talking about stuff and going over the report, I try to, tame stuff down to an extent so nobody's pulling out their hair at least. But there's a lot of attempt for me, for us to tame it down and say, this is normal. I'll say, for instance, the pressure relief valve pipe down. So I guarantee 10 houses out of 20 houses in the block are the same way. That's how normal this is. We always kind of preach and stuff like that to the clients. And talk about buying side, I'd rather see be on the selling side of doing pre-sale inspections.
Exactly.
I think that is 100% the way to go. And I'm telling you how to do that. It's hard for a seller to pay that expense, upfront expense, because they're going to sell a house, but that is, talk about hurdles a while ago also, I think that's, could cause, much less hurdles for everybody involved.
Yeah, the pre-inspection really eliminates everything. I always tell them just sell it as inspected or priced accordingly. You guys come up with whatever lingo you like for that, but that way everything's up front. And I always tell them up front, I'm doing this. Yes, you might get another home inspector come in. They might find a little minor thing like reverse polarity, something minor, but the major things will be the same, and the major things are the real focus of this for your real estate inspection. And you get that done in advance, it just makes the whole process go so much smoother, so much easier, because then you've got informed buyer, seller, all realtors, everyone knows going in what they're buying, unless there's a big surprise. But I've never heard of a big surprise after a pre-inspection, really. I mean, there's always the little stuff. You can tell them there's gonna be other little stuff the other home inspector finds, but it's the major components you're looking for.
I feel like a pre-inspection when it says it's been addressed or been fixed, because that's what we see on the reports after they put given to us as a buyer's agent. I rarely does a buyer say, who fixed that roof? Who fixed that plumbing? Who fixed it? They just want to know it's fixed. And so that puts a peace of mind, and it gets that, I'm all about the licensed people, but sometimes the licensed person didn't do it.
And you have to be careful using the word license.
Yes.
There aren't licensed general contractors.
Oh, right,
Come in
right.
and put vapor barrier to crawl. There aren't licensed to do a lot, concrete
Sure.
workers. I mean, there are licensed electricians and plumbers and roofers,
Right.
but
And even
that's
a
about
licensed
it.
person, you could have 5 different licensed roofers come look at a roof and have 5 different quotes or thoughts of that roof.
Yeah.
The last person in is what usually everybody hears. Either the roof is bad, shot, or it's got 5 more years left, or whatever. The last person in has the say so, in a way.
There's
Seems
also
like
the
where I-
definition of qualified contractor, so if my seller wants to do a potentially dangerous repair themselves, for example, electrical, I asked, do you want that liability? No, the house burns down 3 days after they move it. Do you want that liability, or you just want to have, because a license is a qualification. But to me, there's no licensed contractor, there's no qualification. We had a licensed electrician make a repair that nearly killed our buyer, actually, something. And I tell everyone, here's what I know about electricity. You need it, it can kill you, call an electrician. But I think Tim had inspected this one for me, he was supposed to fix something in the box, and he fixed it with electrical tape. And,
not me.
no, and it,
Yeah.
glue, and, so anyway, I asked my seller, do you want that on your liability, you just want someone to come and fix it? So, I'm competent to fix nothing. And I appreciate all the time, I tell people I'm not a licensed home inspector, but I spend a lot of time with them.
We play one on TV.
And I've learned so much from you, and I appreciate that.
And that's what we're there to inform you about your house, so you can make an educated purchase. And that's where that pre-inspection helps, because it doesn't do a whole lot of good to buy a house contingent on a home inspection, because like you said, there could be thousands of dollars worth of things that we point out that you can't ask for. So if you have that pre-inspection done, you've really got an educated, informed buyer and seller, and everyone can move forward knowledgeable and informed on that
It
purchase.
seems like the seller would have a lot more control
Yeah.
over the
Well,
transaction.
it's one less negotiation you have to go through.
And
You
there's,
have a lot more control, you have the upper hand, instead of the buyer side having,
Yep.
human nature is to get the best deal. And so, like buying a car.
and I hate to say this out loud, but it's also a big psychological thing, because if someone pays $500 for an inspection, they're gonna find $500 worth of things they want, whether it's right or wrong, that's what they do. If it's pre-inspected and sold as is per the inspection, they say, here's the inspection, you can read it, but we're not fixing anything else, they pick it up, say, oh, well, that looks okay. And they don't spend near as much time reading it, because they know they're limited on what they can get for it. If they pay for it, they wanna go through line by line and find something to get their money back.
I think a pre-inspection saves the seller more than it costs them.
Yes. And it helps get them more money for their house beginning.
Yes.
or at least a fairer price. And if they got a lot of issues, then they can decide where they go forward with it that way. It makes them in the driver's seat moving forward.
This year and last year, they get all the money they want out of it.
Right.
Change it, hope,
Yeah.
it might be changing here, who knows what's gonna happen next
Yep.
year.
I think one thing to consider, I know we've been talking about the buyers, whether or not they can list a licensed person or something like that. But when it comes to stating your lane as representing the sellers, there are different statutes and stuff that are outside of licenses or outside of real estate, like building codes and ordinances or zoning. I'm thinking Cabbage Patch is partially Sangamon County, partially Springfield. So if they're going to do anything, they're supposed to pull a permit, whatever they're doing. And so Sangamon County, the homeowner can pull electrical permits, things like that, but in the city, the zoning requires certain licensed people to pull those permits. So again, stay in your lanes, I would tell your seller, yeah, you can fix that because the contract says you can. That may not be true, so sometimes what mom doesn't know doesn't hurt. I'm not telling you what to do, but
No, right.
technically you're supposed to pull permits, and only certain people can pull certain permits.
That is true. You can't do electrical work to a major extent if you're not gonna live in the house. And then you're practicing electrician, but you're selling the house to somebody else.
Right, I think there's something that this is from the city inspector, Rich Benanke. They told me something about if the seller does do it, if the utilities are supposed to remain in their name for a year.
Yes.
So that could affect your seller's ability to, and I think it's a good rule because it prevents fly-by-night flippers going in there doing shoddy work and then selling the next day. But it also can impact your seller who is in the contract to sell within 30 days.
If you go to court, there could be a lot of pullback on that, because who made you qualified to do that electrical work? And the city says you're not qualified. We don't get into that, I stay in my lane over here, but I'll agree with that.
But my point is, yeah, on the one side, on the buyer, you can't say it has to be licensed, but on the seller, as an agent, you should be careful.
There may be a time that it needs
You're
it.
good to
Right.
fix that, no worries.
Right.
Just, you stay in your lane, I would just take that. It needs to be-
Right, yeah.
Thank you
All
for.
right, any other questions? The last thing I'll add, which you touched on it a little bit, we've heard a little, and just some rumblings in the Forms Committee about sellers not wanting buyers to attend a home inspection. And not super common, but just know that in the buyer inspection addendum, it allows the buyer to attend the home inspection, generally at the end. The inspector doesn't want the buyer there breathing down their neck the whole time, so they'll put down a time frame. But I think, maybe if COVID kicks up again, that may be another issue where sellers don't want people in their house. But if that's gonna be an issue, they probably need to know that up front, early on, as opposed to later on telling the buyer they can't attend the inspection. And for the most part, it's, for a seller, what I have told my sellers is, you want the buyer to attend that inspection. Because if they look at the report without having somebody discuss it with them first, it's gonna terrify them. But if they're there to see it, they hear it from the inspector, there will be a sense of calm that comes over them when they know that, it says water heater's bad. Well, no, it's a $3 pipe that gets screwed onto the bottom of it, so there's a pressure relief.
Getting out of my lane for a second, I agree with that 100%. And whenever I tell people the buyer's showing up, well, I didn't know that, I thought just you were gonna be here. I get that 90% of the time, would you agree?
Yes. 91%.
We can't agree on anything.
Yeah, that's huge of the selling side, knowing that the buyer
Yes.
eventually may show up. I've been, I've been blasted before hard, and I'm recommending my buyer, my client could show up towards the end, and we're going to be here 10, 15, 20 minutes, we'll go over a couple things, we'll be out of here. I try to make it as simple as I can to them at that point, because they're beyond repair at that point sometimes.
In 27 years, I've been kicked to the front yard 20 or more times to discuss if they will not allow us in the house after I tell them that.
Really?
Yes, it gets
I
that
did.
touchy.
Further this week,
Yes, it happens a lot. No one, I mean, I preach this and preach this and preach this. Let your sellers know the buyer may show up at the end. Because the sellers, some of them just get irate. I didn't clean my house. I don't have it ready for that person to see it. I don't want them to see it. They get mad.
Do most agents, I know we always meet you at the end, do most agents do that?
Oh, I just want to bring that up too, yes. If, whenever possible, I know Tina, you do, Rachel, you do, on the buying side, it is very, very nice for an agent to show up with the walkthrough, basically, for, verbiage and seeing what the condition of everybody's persona, of what's going on at the inspection at that time, because sometimes things get said, don't get said. I'll just say fib sometimes, lies of this or that, he said, she said stuff a lot. So there's a lot, sometimes that gets very irritating. Whenever possible, I'm not saying, everybody's busy doing showings or whatever, and office work, and it's just whenever possible, it's good to have the agent there to represent and sometimes be a coach.
I feel like it's good for that, and I don't think it's your responsibility. Say my buyer shows up and you're up in the attic.
Yes,
If we're not there, what are they doing in
We
this?
have a lot of responsibility.
Right, and how can
Everybody
you do
comes in
that?
their house, say it's a vacant house, or even occupied, and they're not there for that day. It's got an in-ground pool. I've had kids show up, families show up, grandma and grandpa show up. There's a herd of people in this house. I'm like, oh God, I'm watching the pool, so nobody gets in the pool. Small kids and so forth. So it helps us out a lot. Again, just to have some control over, if you know your client, the buyer, has a lot of people that may be showing up.
Right.
I always say the home inspection is the time to come back and redo all that, it's time to meet just the buyer and go over what we have, and not time for family and friends to show up. Right. Because I don't know, I've never asked my insurance agent, never had anything happen, but if anything ever happens, I don't know if I have insurance for that.
I'm not sure who's responsible.
Right.
Me or you? If the seller swears something disappeared or was
The
broken.
person who opens the
Yeah.
lockbox, I don't know.
I don't know.
That's
It's
the
never
last
come up.
tip right there.
Never.
Who opens that lockbox?
Might be something we need to talk about at Forbes.
Right.
So many buyers.
Yeah,
It's
measure,
not-
measure.
Oh, I just want to measure for.
It's not the intent for a show.
Right, and we need to definitely make sure that.
Sometimes I, cover, exploring people, so if I can, I just usually talk to them.
They act like that door's unlocked, it's a free thing. It's like, no.
And sometimes the seller may come home at that time too, and here comes the whirlwind.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes rather than interrupt the seller again, like people do want to measure this or that, I'll tell them, we'll do that when we meet the home inspector, but I let them know we're gonna be
Yeah,
there. So that we don't have to come again and interrupt them again.
sure.
Because sometimes they get the house under contract and they're just chomping at the bit to get back in there and.
Right.
But
Reasonably.
All right, any other questions? Thanks,
Thank
Cheryl.
you very much.
Thank you, guys.